everyone and welcome to my new video. On today's video I'm going to do a wrap up of the books that I read in 2020. So just to give you a bit of background to my reading journey, I guess. When I was a child I used to love reading. I used to read all the time and I used to have about 6 books on the go always. And they used to always live under my pillow. I do not know how I used to sleep with all books under my pillow, but anyway. I even used to walk home from school, which was about a 30-second walk, and I'd always read on the way home. However, when I went to high school, I sort of fell out with my love of reading, adapted into a new school, and then just as you progress through high school, you've also got a lot more work to do. And a lot more sort of social activities, so I didn't used to read that much throughout high school. And then moving on to university, I didn't read too much, but I started picking up reading a bit more. So whenever I was going on holiday, I used to always bring some books with me, and I used to read a lot going on holiday. But during term times, I never used to read that much either. So I never used to get through a lot of books during university time either, besides the things I had to read for my studies. However, over the last few years, I've really tried to up my reading again. So the first book I read in 2020 was A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This probably doesn't need a big synopsis, as I'm pretty sure most people know what this is about. It is one of the few classics I have read. Besides the odd few and ones we had to read from school, I haven't really delved into classics a lot, which is something I definitely want to change. And I think this is a good place to start, as everyone knows the story of A Christmas Carol. So I did give this story 3 out of 5 stars, which I know loads of people will be horrified at. However, I think because it is so overtold, I just sort of knew exactly what was going to happen, but I did enjoy this book all the same. The second book I read was This Is Gonna Hurt by Adam Kay. Unfortunately, I don't know where this book has gone, so I can't hold it up. And again, this is quite a popular book of the last few years when it did get released. And it's basically about a junior doctor's diary entries about working in the NHS. And it is such an excellent book. It's so funny. It's one of the only few books I've ever laughed out loud at. And I just think it's such an excellent portrayal of the NHS and their struggles and heartaches, but as well as what a junior doctor has to go through for their first few years of working there. This book I gave 5 stars. I thought it was hilariously funny, and I definitely recommend it to anyone who's interested to know anything more about the NHS or working in the medical field. And the third book I read this year was Brave in the Wilderness by Brené Brown. I actually listened to this book on Audible, so I don't have a physical copy of it. But again, this book is really interesting. It is a non-fiction book, so if anyone's wanting to read more non-fiction, I would definitely recommend this book, as I give it 5 stars. It was one of my favourite books of the year. So basically this book, Brené Brown describes that we experience a spiritual disconnect, as where we're trying to fit into this world that isn't maybe designed for us, especially in places like social media where everyone's just trying to be everyone else. And it's all about finding the courage to be yourself and just embrace who you are. So if you want to find out more about that sort of thing and the more psychology behind it, it's an excellent book and I'd highly recommend it. And the fourth book I read this year was also an audiobook. So basically when I commute to work, obviously not anymore, but at the start of last year, I was driving to work about an hour every day, and I love putting audiobooks on. So the fourth book I have on my list is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I don't really know how to pronounce his second name. However, this book has been really popular as well. I've seen quite a few people read it. Basically, after this lady commits a crime, she decides to take a vow of silence. So it basically follows the account of trying to uncover what actually happened during the crime and whether she did it and why she did it, because there's a lot of missing gaps in the story at the beginning, and it's just a really interesting way to approach this sort of mystery, and I really enjoyed that about it. So I give this book 4 out of 5 stars. So the next book I have on my list is The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This book I saw on many lists for being very highly rated, and I thought I'd give it a go. It's a mystery thriller type book, and it basically starts off with this lady who lives in London and sees this ad to be an au pair for a house up in Scotland in the Highlands. The job is very highly paid, and she is sort of thinking, what is the catch? Why is it such an ideal position for her to be in? So she basically turns up and she takes a position. The book is written as she is writing letters to her lawyer explaining what has happened. So you know from the beginning that she is in prison for something that's happened during this job. And throughout her time as an au pair, all these mysterious things start happening, and you wonder whether the house is maybe haunted, if she's maybe suffering from mental illness and that's causing these mysterious things to happen, or if it's one of the children playing tricks on her to try and get her to leave. So it's a very interesting perspective, and right at the end you find out why she's in prison and what actually happens, the truth behind the story. The ending is pretty good, and it definitely is a shock. I did not see it coming, but I overall really enjoyed this book. But this book I gave 3 stars in the end. So the next book on my list is a bit of a stretch by Chris Atkins. This book is diary extracts from a person who gets sent to prison for white collar crime. He gets sent to a London prison that has very low funding, and it hasn't been well maintained over the last several years. In this book, it's really interesting to see his perspective of prison from someone who hasn't been around a lot of crime throughout his life and finds himself in a very different situation. He has to learn the rules of the prison and how to act with all the different people in the prison. It also touches on a lot of issues within the prison system regarding underfunding and the availability of mental health counselling. I did think it was quite similar to Adam Kay's book in the terms that it is a person doing diary extracts, and it sort of highlights issues within the system. Obviously, Adam Kay's book is about issues of the NHS, and Chris Atkins' book is about issues in the justice system and in the prisons. But again, it was so good, and it's just hilarious, the sort of situations he's in and the things he overhears and the conversations he's part of. It's just very, very funny. Overall, I gave this book a 5-star rating. The next book on my list was Amusing Ourselves to Death. This is by Neil Postman and Andrew Postman. Basically, I didn't enjoy this book all too much, and in the end I only actually gave it 2 stars. From what I remember, it's basically about how we have so much information flying around in this generation that we are sort of amusing ourselves to death, I think. And a lot of it speaks about the issue of fake news and things like that. So if you're interested in that, then maybe it's a book for you, but it wasn't really a book I was interested in. So the next book on my list is Power by Naomi Alderman. This book is a dystopian novel, and it's about women that are born with this superpower which makes them able to give people agonising pain and can even kill them. I really like dystopian novels. I don't know why, I just think there's something really interesting about them, and they're normally very creative, and this book was definitely one of them. It follows a group of people and some women with this power, and also a young boy as well. I did think it was really good, however it's not one of the top dystopian novels I have read, and for that reason I gave it a 3-star rating. So the next book on my list is this book. So it's The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, and I think most people have heard of this novel, especially because there is a series on Amazon just now and it's a remaking of this book. Basically, it's about what would happen if Hitler won the Second World War and what would the world look like. And the whole book is sort of centred around this man in the high castle. Who is the man in the high castle? I did really like this book, however it did focus a lot on the military side of the current world and less so on the sort of day-to-day lives of individuals, which is what I was sort of hoping for in this book. However, it is a really short read, and if it's something you're interested in, I know of a lot of people that really enjoy this book. So for this book, I give it a 3-star rating. So the next book I read in the year was this book here, which is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. The reason I read this book is because I'm a huge fan of Studio Ghibli. This is one of the books that they have made into a movie, and before seeing this book online, I didn't know that any of the movies were based on books, and I decided to give this one a go. So this is I would say it's a children's book, however it is quite dark, and I think for some children it could be quite scary. It follows the story of a girl called Sophie Hatter. She bumps into the Witch of the Waste, who puts a curse on her, and she knows one of the only people that is able to reverse the curse could be Howl, and he lives in a moving castle. Howl has also had a run-in with the Witch of the Waste, and it's basically a story about her trying to reverse the curse as she's living with Howl. It's a very good book, and I'd highly recommend it. So for this book, I give it a 4-star rating. The next book I read was My Sister the Serial Killer, which again has been very highly recommended on loads of lists last year. So it's basically about girls whose sister is a serial killer, and it follows her perspective of trying to help her, even though she knows she's her sister and she needs to protect her. However, she can't get over the fact that she's a serial killer and just wish she'd stop killing people, basically. It is a very different perspective from the normal thriller serial killer type book, and for that I really liked it. However, I didn't think the characters were developed that strongly, and I don't know, they didn't have a lot of sympathy for them, so for that reason I gave it a 3-star rating. The next book on my list is the largest book I read in the year, which is this, Pachinko. So this is by Minjin Lee, who is an American Korean author, and this was by far the best book I read this year. I'd go far to say it's one of the best books I have ever read. It is so interesting. So I don't tend to read a lot of big books, and I was even really involved in this book, and I didn't want it to end. It was that good. It basically starts in 1911 and ends in roughly 1989. So it follows a family through the generations, and it first starts off with a mother and her daughter, and it later shows the daughter growing up and having a family of her own. And it discusses a lot of interesting things. They're a Korean family who moved to Japan, and during this time there's the war going on as well, and Korean people are sort of seen as the under race, and they're not respected in Japanese society. And it touches on a lot of interesting topics about poverty and trying to make a better life for your family, and it's just such an interesting read. It has some very sad parts of the book, but also some very happy moments as well, and I'd recommend it to anyone who wants to read this book and learn more about Japanese and Korean culture. And of course, I give this book a solid 5-star rating. So the second last book I read in the year was this tiny book, Mr. Salary by Sally Rooney. So most people know about Conversations with Friends and Normal People that came out I think a few years ago, and I read them back in 2019, and we also got this short story just off the back of loving them books so much. So this book has only 33 pages, so it's absolutely tiny and it's such a quick read. So to tell you more about what this book is about, I shall just read the synopsis as it condenses it a lot better than I could. Years ago, Suki moved in with Nathan because her mother was dead and her father was difficult, and she had nowhere else to go. Now they are on the brink of the inevitable. This was a really good introduction to reading short stories. I think it's so good how Sally Rooney is able to develop characters so quickly, and especially in a book like this, which is only 33 pages. I give this one a 3-star rating. The last book I read in 2020 was In Search of Huama. So I speak some Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, and I'm trying to improve my reading skills. So I bought this book, which is by John Paston and Jared Turner, and this is a graded reader. So it's basically targeted at people who are learning Mandarin Chinese, and it is their breakthrough level. So if you know roughly 150 characters, you will be able to read this book pretty easily. I don't really know how many characters I could read, so I started out with their lowest level, and I'm planning to read a few more of their stories in the future. Basically, the book is all in Chinese characters, and any word that you wouldn't be expected to know at this level is highlighted, and the opinion as well as the English translation is given below. This again is quite a short story at under 50 pages, but as it is my first book reading in another language, it did take me quite a while to read this, as I'm still developing my reading in Mandarin. I would highly recommend reading these books if you are learning Mandarin Chinese, as it's a great introduction to reading bigger stories in the future. This story is about a young boy whose mother's birthday is soon approaching. He doesn't have any money, so he's hoping to find him some flowers for her birthday. He is then transported into another place in China and is told in order to get back home he has to find Huama, which translates as flower horse. And he is on this mission to basically get back home in time for his mother's birthday with some flowers to celebrate her birthday together. So in the end, I give this book a 4-star rating. The story itself doesn't go into a whole lot of depth, and there isn't a lot of description around the characters themselves or where they are, but that's mainly due to it being in another language and aimed at people who are learning Mandarin Chinese. However, I did give it a 4-star in the end, mainly because I was just very impressed that I was able to read this book, and it was a great feeling to finish it in the end. So that was all the books I read in 2020, and I'm continuing to read this year. So if you do want to follow me on Goodreads, I will leave my link down below. And if you'd like more content like this relating to books, please also like this video. And as always, if you are interested in seeing more videos from myself, please subscribe. Thank you, bye!